This program is brought to you in association with First National Bank of Botswana. Crime happens every single day, some very petty crime and some very gruesome. Do you remember the armed robbery cases that have since plagued the country? Some of the arrested alleged perpetrators are going to need representation for that day in court to either escape hefty sentences or substantially less prison time handed to them if found guilty. This representation will be or is in the form of a criminal defense lawyer. It is then the criminal defense lawyer's duty to hear about the crime from that client's perspective and understand the evidence so that they could come up with strong arguments in court to help that client. The accused may have committed rape, murder, armed robbery, battery, or any other criminal activity. Either way, we can safely assume that this takes a huge bill of dedication, hard work and discipline. To have a more in-depth conversation around this, we have invited attorney at law and senior partner at Mogobe Legal Practitioners, Mompoloki to answer some of our burning questions. He has been practicing law for well over 30 years, having been a civil defense attorney and sometimes defending those accused of heinous, often very gruesome crimes. At the time of recording this interview, he was defending a young man accused of murder. While others may feel that he's defending someone accused of taking a family's loved one, he, on the other hand, believes that everyone deserves a fair day in court, no matter the circumstance or the crime, as supported by the laws of this country. But what exactly does it take to have the heart to want to help someone who is already condemned by society?
I have to do a little bit of a flashback and think back to the time when I was a student. Originally, I was thinking of becoming an architect, and when I realized that architecture presented a challenge in terms of the requirements, I then had law as a second option. But once I got into law school and I just fell in love with it, when eventually we graduated after going to the University of Edinburgh in Scotland, came back here and graduated, I knew that I wanted to go into the private sector. A lot of my colleagues wanted to go to government, which would mean that they would be prosecutors, state attorneys. I was very clear from the onset. I went and worked for Minchin and Kelly, which means that I was representing mostly, defendants and plaintiffs. I was more on the civil law side, and that's when I gradually became a defense lawyer, in the sense that I was defending my clients who were being sued. And occasionally, like you mentioned, there would be an occasional criminal case, where mostly Brodeo criminal cases, where we are actually appointed by the High Court of Botswana to represent criminal accused persons.
A typical day consists of Mogobe trying to understand the mind of the accused, whether they are aware of what happened and why it happened, and also assessing the alleged events.
I'm currently doing a Brodeo case now, and the pattern has always been the same. I really want to get into the mind of my client and understand what they are accused of in terms of their perception of what happened, and to look at, the event, the entire, if somebody is accused, for argument's sake, of stabbing someone with a knife, I'd like to get into their mind and even go to the site where it is alleged to have happened and interview my own witnesses. What happens is that most of the time, the prosecution will give you an album with photos of what happened, for instance, how gruesome an event it was. And then in addition to that, you would have a series of statements from various witnesses. And what I always do is not just to rely on these statements, but to get the best version for my client. But I have to emphasize that it is, for me personally, it's very occasional for us to do that. We're mostly doing it on a Brodeo basis. Most of the cases we do are on the corporate and civil side.
He adds that to be successful lawyers at their practice, they have a 7-point system that they follow at Lerumo Mogobe Legal Practitioners.
We actually have a 7-point system at Lerumo Mogobe Legal Practitioners. This is the law firm that I founded more than 3 decades ago. Initially, I had partnered with now Judge Itumela Sohopolo. But this 7-point system, which we developed over time, involves firstly being relentless. When I say relentless, I mean the sense of determination that one has to have to try and win a case for your client. And we try to show this by ensuring that we stay in touch with our client. We ensure that we advise client on a continual basis of any development in the case. That's the first one. One of the second things is to ensure that there are systems in place for how the law firm is run. Here at Lerumo Mogobe Legal Practitioners, we have a computerized system where everything is centralized in terms of accounts, in terms of ensuring that you keep track of, things like costs, fees, and disbursements. That's just 2 I've mentioned. There's 5 more. Then marketing. It's important that you market as a lawyer. There was a time when, in terms of the Law Society rules, we're not allowed to do marketing. But there was a case some years ago, about 4 years ago, involving a certain Mr. Harababono, where he challenged this law, which said, it was actually in terms of the rules of the Law Society, in terms of the Law Society Act, they called it touting if you market. And he challenged it, and the court found that those are ancient rules, those rules no longer apply. So lawyers are now allowed to openly market and promote themselves. We're very active on social media, and we go out to clients and market our business like everybody else. And then I talk about recordal. What is recordal? And this is something I emphasize with young lawyers. Make sure that you record everything. An email should confirm all conversations, because you are working in a very heated environment where people are emotional and disputes can really get very expensive. So it's important that you record everything, and then you are able to back yourself up tomorrow as a lawyer in case of a dispute. There's a question of being persistent and recency. The lawyers that succeed more than the lawyers that don't succeed, I found, really practice this attitude of being persistent, being persevering, and pushing clients' cases more than not. It should not just be about money. In my view, money and billing is very, very important. But over and above that, are you delivering a service? Are you trying to go the extra mile? Are you persistent in your effort to win a case for a client? And that involves other issues like preparation, which is the other point I was going to mention, and teamwork, which is another point. Do you really, really spend a lot of time preparing for your case? How much time have you spent in the library? Have you looked at all the cases that are relevant to the point that you want to deal with? Are you sure you've prepared? Heads of argument. Heads of argument are going to guide you when you appear before a judge and you present your case. Those are the sort of issues that we look at. We ensure that you are thorough in your preparation. That is very, very important.
Mogobe is of the view that to be able to separate emotions from the job, one must focus on the bigger picture, which means adopting a strict professional approach to each case.
The key thing is that you are a professional. You do your best to keep emotions out, the same way as a doctor does that when maybe doing an operation. It's not disturbed by the blood or whatever. So you develop that. It's part of the training where you train yourself to focus on the facts, just the facts. Emotion you stay away from. And then of course, if indeed the situation is very gory, it's very emotionally jarring, so to speak, you do your best to insulate yourself from that by focusing on the facts and doing your work. And any attorney involved in this kind of work, criminal work, will tell you that it's not so difficult if you've been trained, if you know what you're doing, and if you know your facts.
He further says that this being a profession that sometimes attracts negative public opinion, criminal defense lawyers must try not to play into the public sphere and focus on the matter at hand.
Everybody is entitled to be defended. I think it's a constitutional right, and our founders found it important enough to put it in our constitution that everybody is entitled to legal representation by a lawyer of his own choice. I would just say to the person who's perpetrating that view or who's promoting that perception, what happens when you're in trouble? Wouldn't you like a good lawyer, a thorough lawyer to represent you? So we try not to play in the public sphere or in the public gallery in terms of what the media is saying, what the public is saying. We focus on our case. That's all we can do. Be as professional, as thorough as possible. As long as you are guided by the ethics of the profession, as long as you are complying with the rules of the Law Society in terms of the Legal Practitioners Act, you're okay. You are able to just focus on a professional basis on what is before you.
He also says the evolution of his career and what to focus on was driven by a discovery of the niche market.
One had to decide as to where one's niche is. As things went on over time, we decided that we wanted to do conveyancing, which is transfer of property. We wanted to focus on debt collection, which was, and then litigation. So we had to decide, make a conscious decision, where do we believe our manpower is best directed at. So over time, we discovered our niche. In Botswana, you can't really specialize too much because of the size of the market. The market is small, but you can decide on general categories of work to focus on. So when there are two categories like corporate civil work versus criminal work, we decided to focus on corporate civil work. But speaking jokingly, people say crime doesn't pay. So maybe we figured that that criminal cases don't pay as well. Maybe that was a factor as well.
He adds that while this profession is considered somewhat dangerous, he has not felt particularly unsafe as a practicing lawyer.
Not even from one moment. Over the years, when I was very active, right now, as you know, I'm a senior partner and I'm involved in other ventures, for instance, outside the law. Since 2013, I've focused on entrepreneurship. But looking back over the years, even now, that has never been a factor. There was an incident where a colleague of mine was assaulted by someone who was not happy with the outcome of a matrimonial case, assaulted with an axe, no less, and he eventually died. And then after this incident, I just advised my people that when you are working late, make sure that you lock. And then in strategic places, we make sure we have cameras to ensure that that we take the precautions that are not necessarily extraordinary. They're not dissimilar from precautions that are taken by other businesses. But I think it's a function of crime generally going up. And yes, occasionally there's such situation like I've given you an example of a colleague who was assaulted. So to answer your question, it's not a major concern, but it is a concern. You have to take care of your safety and your security.
Mogobe says as a defense lawyer, one only has to consider whether or not there's any defense to any alleged crime to move forward and may push aside any other perceptions, especially those that are negative.
Defenses that are available to a client are defenses that are available under the law. If it's a defense of self-defense in a murder situation, that defense is prescribed by law. If it's a defense of provocation, that defense is prescribed by law. And then any other defense that may be available to you is prescribed by law. So your duty as a lawyer is to find out whether there's a defense available to your client. And then we focus on developing that defense. And you put aside all the other considerations. And I sleep like a baby. I don't have an issue because I know I'm doing good work You know, I do not have a problem of my conscience hounding me, and I suspect a lot of attorneys will tell you the same.